I'm going to share here. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if that works. So I put together a little agenda. We'll send it out to you right afterwards. There we go. So this is our second meeting. Thank you for everybody for being here this evening. I appreciate it. Your time is valuable, and I really appreciate you being here tonight. Give you a little overview of what we're going to do, and I'll take you through a couple of documents. We really want to have more discussion than not towards the end here, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So our agenda, I'll just quickly remind everybody the vision, mission, beliefs, and guiding principles, which you'll see on these next couple slides, and you have them in a couple of the other documents. Our mission and our vision, we know what they are. We're focused on everything that we do is focused on attaining these. And every budget decision, every resource we try to drive, and the question always should be, how are these resources being driven toward helping us achieve our mission and vision? So it's always a good checkpoint, and we should always be able to say, this is how this is helping, or this is how this is working toward that. The next section is our beliefs and our guiding principles. Same thing. Is everything is what we're doing aligning with this work? It helps us keep the center line. And then we have the reminders of really what the budget committee role and purpose is. And really it's so important is really advisory. You're giving us a feel for the community, what's going on in the schools from your stakeholder perspectives, helping us to really shape what we're doing. And you'll see in a couple minutes here, different, just another pieces of what we're doing, provide you information as representatives out in the community if people ask questions, things like that. Our coherence plan really comes back to creating that collective commitment. And I think if you look back over the last 2 years, one of the reasons why we've tried to at least stay at that center line and tried to keep on with our work even through these difficult times, we've been able to adapt and adjust. And our plan has been able to adapt and adjust to all the changes in our plans over time. Obviously, tomorrow is a monumental day, if you will. It's the first time really in a very, very, very long time where masks become optional. And that in itself presents some unique and different challenges. But throughout this process, our coherence plan has really helped us maintain the center line. The next couple slides, and these are just be reference slides for you, and we'll send this out right after the meeting. But again, these are slides you've seen. These are our strategic intents in the areas of leadership, literacy, instruction, social developmental health, family engagement, and innovation. And then the way that we set it up this year, if you remember, easy access, if you want to see the reports that were done at board meetings already, you just click right here so they're easily accessible for you. And Dom, the one that I pulled still doesn't have the link on the social emotional. So I'm not sure if it's just the one I pulled or the one that's been shared, but we should make sure that that link happens for the SCL because that presentation has been done. And we've also done the family engagement. So we need to link these two to make sure they're linked to this report. It may have just been they weren't linked to the one I'm using. And then finally, what I really want to get tonight after we go through the reports in just a couple of minutes, and I want you to reflect on these two questions throughout, as you're listening tonight and asking questions. We want to get towards the latter part of the meeting. We really want these two questions to ponder. And these are actually the two questions that we used last year during the budget committee. And we generated a lot of thoughts and ideas, and there are things that we still were thinking about this year that were generated in those meetings or in that meeting. So I think this is an important one. The other thing we hope to share with you was some videos this evening. But with the happenings over the last week or so, we didn't get those completed, but we've got scripts put together. So those should be rolling out, I think, because they were great ideas. So those will be getting done because those were fantastic ideas. And so those are happening. It's just unfortunate we were able to pull them off more expeditiously. So much for that. But we will getting them out. So the two questions are, what are the top 3 questions that members of our community need answered regarding the school district budget? And each of you has different perspectives really from the roles you come in. And some of you obviously serve in multiple roles. Your parents as well as teachers in our community, your parents and your business representatives from our community. You serve many different roles in our community. So what are the top 3 questions that members of our community need answered regarding the school district budget. So that's one of the questions that we're going to open up for a discussion towards the end of the meeting. And then what questions do we need to explore for strategic long-term budget planning? You've heard me talk about this, and this is one of the most important years and one of the best opportunities that we'll ever have to really start to thinking about where we want to be. What are the things that we need to be thinking about? Because of the federal funds, we know that those are one-time funds. And so we have to make sure as we move forward, how do we integrate that in? And I'll be able to cover that a little bit when we look at the roll forward budget. And you'll be able to see kind of what we're talking about in that, I hope. So those are the two questions I'd like you to think about. Are there any questions on those? Questions about the questions? Okay. So I'm going to shift one here and put this one up on the screen, and then I'm going to share it again. Oops. Okay. Let me see. Is that not showing it? Why isn't that working? There it goes. So we're going to share with you a couple of documents that were shared at the 8th board meeting and the 22nd board meeting, and really for your reference. And I'm going to go through slides that we really have already covered, but this one was on enrollment and staffing status. And so as usual, they start off with our mission, vision, and our budget parameters. Another report where you can just link. As you can see, the links are right here in the reports. So these are our budget parameters in each of our areas, associated with leadership, literacy, instruction, social, emotional, developmental health. We need to show the link there, as well as family engagement and innovation. So anybody on my team at any time, welcome to chime in here. So you've seen all of those before. So everything comes back, and everything, the work that we're doing in the budget that we're building drives back to these initial budget parameters in these 6 areas of our work. And in that report, there was a budget. You've seen the budget glossary, I believe, of the terms. You've had the budget calendar. We'll talk about 3-part budgets in future meetings. And the revenues we've talked about already as well. Some of the reports here and just some trends that you'll see here. So Beds Day is a special day. Really, the first day and the first Wednesday of October generally is Beds Day. And what that is really the day that they capture data that drives funding that comes to schools. And so as you can see, and this is just the one important thing that you drive from this slide, and you can see the at the bottom here, each of the areas they represent. Blue is pre-K, K6 is in red, and ungraded elementary is in red as well. And then you've got your 7-8 total in a lighter green, your 9-12, and then your ungraded. And you can see they're very tiny, little ungraded. And our ungraded elementary is a very tiny number. You can see it, right? This tiny little piece here. They're a very small number. But the big piece on this slide is in 2011-12, we had 3,783 students in the Fulton City School District. And over time, you can see how that number has declined. And this is something that is consistent across Oswego County. So if you go back about 10 years in Oswego County, you'd find numbers like 26,000 students in our district, give or take, or in our county, give or take. The latest numbers are more like 19,600. So as a county, we've lost upwards of 7,000 kids, give or take. So and so we're mirroring that. And if you do the math, it's approximately a little over 500 kids, 530 kids, I believe, that have been reduced. And when you think about that and quantify this, and I said this at the board meeting the other night as well, our elementary schools range from 350, give or take, at Volney to around 515 at Granby. So when you look at this number of over 500, that's the equivalent size of one of our elementary schools. It's an interesting way to look at that, and I hadn't thought about it that way, but that kind of quantifies it for you. We've lost over 500 children in our enrollment over time. And I think that's an important piece for us to be cognizant of, because we go down between 50 and 100 a year when you really do the math. So, and it's spread across grade levels. So it's not like they're all at one. So you take that across a kindergarten through 12th grade, and it gives you, or actually in this case, pre-K through 12th grade. So I think it's an interesting number for you to be aware of. Are there any questions about that? This is also another good slide just for the general public to be aware of over time. And what this is our K-12 enrollment and our free and reduced lunch percentage. And you go back to 11-12, we were at 50% of our population, actually went down to 45% in 12-13. And then it seemed to go up, and then it stayed steady, and then it grew over time into the mid 60s. And so what this says is 65% of our students in the Fulton City School District are receiving free or eligible for free or reduced lunch. Now, remember, we're a community eligibility provision, or a CEP district. What that means is all of our kids were in that program that came in. I think in my second year, I felt it was something that would benefit all of our families in the district. It's a federal program. And the key for us, and you know what I want as a budget committee is if you saw this number dropping from over time, let's say from 59, and it was going to in 17-18 and it had dropped. One of the things that when you're in CEP, you're not collecting all the forms that other school districts may have to do to monitor that. So for us, it's important for us to monitor this number extremely closely. And you can see we've held sway and been very solid, 62, 65, 63, 65. So it's a very solid number. That's important because that's one of the numbers that's in the foundation aid formula, and we have to keep an eye on that. So we've done a very good job with that as a CEP district, monitoring and making sure that those numbers remain solid and reflective of the true needs of our district. Any questions on that? And then across the bottom are the actual enrollments, K through 12 on this slide.
Mr. Polvino, I do have a question. So
Sure.
if we're a CEP district and we're not collecting forms, how do we truly know who's income eligible for free lunch? Because everybody's getting free breakfast and lunch.
Yep, there's and I'm trying to, and it's not going to be the right word, Becky. There's an automatic qualifier, and I wish if our food service person here, what it is there's audit through different forms and different programs that parents are in. There's automatic, you automatically qualify. That goes into the database for us. So there's a database for any individuals that are qualifying for services out in the community. Right? So for food services or other types of services, that drives into this automatic qualifiers. And that's what's key. And so that's what we've really kept an eye on over the last 4 years, making sure that families are, that those numbers are remaining strong. For example, about 2 years ago, we noticed this number dropped a bit, and we actually did the mailings. And I think it's something that we can continue to do as a district. We didn't get a lot back, but what it did was it did drive the importance to parents about if you're eligible for these programs, please make sure you either fill out our form, which we can take care of, or if you're in the automatic qualifier programs. So we actually, I want to say it was probably 18, 19. That number was in the mid 50s. And I was like, that doesn't look right. And so that's when we did the mailings. There were if you may have remembered, the bright lime green sheets. I don't know if you got one, but they were a bright color that got sent out to families. And we got a lot of those back. And at the time, Terry Warwick made sure and monitored that, and we were able to get that number up. So that's why we watch that very closely. So, and we do encourage. So for example, we got a call from a family the other day that actually wanted a copy of the letter to help them. They were trying to get Spectrum as a special program, and they needed our letter actually around that. So around the free and reduced. I don't know if that answers your question. So there's an automatic qualifier, Becky, that goes within a system that feeds in. I just don't have the right terminology tonight, but that's the way they do it. So it's this automatic system.
It's direct certification.
There you go.
And it is people who are on income qualifying programs. that information goes into our database. So if you think of a number of public service programs that are income based, if our families are enrolled in those programs, there's a direct certification to identify them as free or reduced lunch eligible.
And Mrs. Geithner, is that data fed to the school district voluntarily through the parents?
So I can't speak to the logistics of how that data is transmitted to us, but I believe it actually is an automatic communication. And then when there are questions, that is when our food service director or our school-based staff would reach out to families and help them complete the documentation that they would need in that regard.
Yeah. Terry, in the database, Terry and our current food service person can run a report, and they could actually say, Brian, there are 1,777 individuals in our direct certification right now. And then we'll know exactly what the percentage is out of. That's how we keep an eye on it, because you never know if families don't go and take care, aren't filling out the paperwork. Or it also lets us know that we need to bolster and communicate as well if we see those numbers fall. It's rare that you're going to see in a city school district, in particular, or a high poverty area, that you're going to see those numbers decline. If you start to see them decline, something's not right.
I can share a link. Sorry, I can share a link to a website that clarifies the process and it shows you how the whole application process works. So I'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah,
Becky, I can speak on in our family. So my oldest son was disabled, but he was accessing PT and OT services through his Medicaid programs, and that was automatically fed through the school district because he was already had those services eligible. So he was, those kind of things are automatically fed in, and then the district has that information so they can base their percentages on that. It wasn't something I even thought about supplying, but it was automatically fed in through his services that he's already receiving in the district level.
I guess I was just trying to gauge the level of confidence in the percentages if this was self-reported versus reported through agencies. So I was just wondering what your level of confidence is in these percentages now that we're not requiring forms from parents.
Yeah, I feel very confident in them because I'm watching them. Anytime they stay the same, that's good. And if they started even go down 1% or 2%, I would start to say, let's get on this and watch this. Spencer, did you have a question? I thought you were leaning forward to turn your volume. I couldn't tell.
Oh no, I asked this question last year, so I understand.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I saw you lean forward, and so used to watching Google Meets, people lean forward. I think they need to speak. So that's really what you should take from this slide. I'm not going to read all of the slides because there's a few that there's a lot of information on. Let's see. This one is our enrollments by subgroups. It just gives you a really good idea. This is slide 12. Once again, here's your free and reduced writing right here, and you can see where it had gone down a little bit, but it's up. You've got your enrollments across the top. This slide is K-12, not pre-K-12, so 3125. And then down here, you've got your students with disabilities. Relatively flat. We're right around 18.5%. Not bad for a city school district, a little bit on the high side. National average has been right around 12 to 13% for a very long time. But city school districts tend to be on that higher teens end, and we've been relatively flat there over time. And you can see the actual numbers right down here. If you're a numbers person and not a graphing type person, you can actually see that we had 564 kids with disabilities in 13-14, and you go over here to 21-22, and we're 581. So you can see we've been relatively flat over time. And that's a good measure of your program because our enrollments have gone down and our numbers have stayed sort of flat. So you've had a slight increase percentage-wise, which is what our graph is showing. So it would be different if we were seeing this go from 615 to 640 to 690. It would say, wait a second, that would really tell us, we need to look at our programming, things like that, just to see is everything what we're doing in our special education programs working, and in all of our MTSS or our multi-tiered systems of supports, academically, socially. All of those things are related to all of the requirements around pre-referral intervention. Also in here, you've got your actual numbers of your economically disadvantaged. You can see this one bothered me a little bit right there, 1969. You see now that, and that was that tough year last year, but right back to where we belong again, see? So again, you see it go. This was the year where we're like, huh, something going on. So that's when, so we watched this very closely. Whoops, these are our English language learners. Right here along the bottom, you can see that population of students, our limited English proficient students, that number has increased over time, and it's been relatively stable. From 17, 18, we had 40, and we're at 40 now. So we came up from the mid-teens, you can see here, and now we've kind of been consistent right in this area at the time. And then we've got our Hispanic students and our McKinney-Vento eligible. Is that right, Ms. Geithner, our MV?
Correct.
So those are our homeless youth who qualify for those types of programs. All right, let's see here. This one's a confusing slide. It's an interesting slide if you're a number cruncher. This slide really is our live birth number. So it really allows us to project out. And you can see they're projecting 256 students in 24-25 that would enter in our kindergarten class. So, and then each year we get the new numbers. We don't have anything beyond 24-25, but we should be getting those because we're right here. And you can see over time, the actual number of kids that were actually enrolled. And then over time, we track that cohort. So you can see, let's see, when they entered here, this one's always confusing to me. So the current year enrollment. So in other words, the cohort that entered in 9-10, they were here, then here. And you can actually see, did we lose numbers from cohorts, things like that. That's how you track the cohort. So the number of kids that actually started, and then the kids that are actually here now. So you can actually see we're pretty flat, but it gives you some interesting trends and things to watch, you know, over time. So that's really what that slide shows. Our enrollment projections over time. This projects us out to 27-28. And again, these are numbers that, you know, are based on the live birth numbers and so on and so forth. And these are the projections that we receive. So it's interesting. It's heartening that you see that this number is not changing a lot, right? In these 3 years through 23, 24, they're projecting a drop here a bit in 24, 25, and then a little bit of a stabilization again, and then a drop. So it's kind of a 2-year flat, then drop, 2-year flat, drop. So we continue to watch, but these are just projections based on live birth trends. This slide is extremely, yeah, this one's not a helpful slide. This is one we're going to remove because it's extremely confusing. Oops. This is just our general ed versus similar schools, which are blue and general, and New York State. Just shows over time that Fulton tends to be on the low end per pupil expenditure. So we're in the red. Blue is similar schools, so similar city schools. And then yellow is the state of New York. So you can see the last numbers that we've received from the state of New York are actually 17, 18. I was looking on the current report card. I didn't see the fiscal supplement yet. They generally run a year to 2 years behind. So, but what it does, it shows the trend over time. We tend to underspend in our district, or as far as comparison to similar in general education. I think that's historically, you see that in Fulton. So it shows is we don't expend a lot, but I think we're for what we do. So I think this is an opportunity for us as we have some of these new additional funds with the foundation aid, perhaps that just shows, you know, are there ways or things that we should be, where should we be driving our money? So this is our per pupil expenditure for special education, same thing, similar kinds of trends as well. And then the following slides are the staffing. So these are the current staffing levels in the schools. So you've got 77 teachers. Think of it this way: there are three classrooms at every grade level, kindergarten through 6th grade in 3 of our elementary schools and 2 at Volney. That adds up to 77. And then also what we have is the number of art teachers, music teachers, phys ed, library media specialists. In the red, when we look at the RTI, the English language arts and the reading, The 3 represents the number of staff that are paid for on the federal funds. So in other words, if the federal funds were gone and never existed, right now in this current budget, we have 10 in our general fund budget. Same thing for math. We have 8 and we have 4. So when we talk about projecting out for the future, and as we look at how our kids are responding and to all of the resources and supports we have in place, you start to make determines, and this is just the first slide, but the determination of, all right, these are essential positions. We look like we're going to need these down the road, 2 and 3 years after, down the road. Those are the types of positions that we'd start to say, okay, these are priorities of the priorities that down the road, as we're building budgets for the future and really trying to expense out over the next 2 to 3 years, we have to think about, okay, how do we roll that into our budget? How do we start to integrate those key positions, key programs into those positions or into the budget for the future? Because right now we've got 30, I believe 30 or 31, I think it's 30 positions right now, full-time positions that are on the new federal monies. So 30 positions. So when you add these up, they come out to about 30, I believe. So right here is 7 of them. So the idea is, out of that 30, our X amount of those, what are we seeing essential? It could be 0 to 30, and then what can we actually afford, which then goes into the priorities of the priorities to say, this is the essential of the essentials, and this is why. Any questions? Okay.
I have a quick question, Brian.
Sure.
What is, I know we kind of skimmed over the slide with our teacher to student ratio.
Yep.
Because I know like at Volney, there's only 2 classes per grade level.
Yep.
And I know the kindergarten especially has 24 kids in a class. And I'm just wondering if have we ever thought about redistricting our students to kind of feel out where, does that make sense? Like how I'm asking that? Like,
yeah. So what you're asking is, do we have that slide? 1 second. We used to do that slide. That's a great question. We used to have a slide that had east side, west side of the river. And what we had was the number of students at each grade level by that. So you might have, and again, they're not memorized, but you may have 18 or 19 kids per class at one grade level in one building. And then Liz, because she's got 2 grade levels, she tends to be pretty tight.
right?
Like 47, 48, 49, 50, right? And so you're right. And then so she could have 2 grade levels at 24 each, right? And then you could go over to, another school. And again, that's a slide. If my team could, because it's a great question. It's a great question because what it says is, if you take the whole grade level and distribute it across the 11 classrooms, the average class size could be 21.
Right.
But because the way it's distributed and where the kids are located, you end up with that distribution. So that's a great slide, Jess. We can get that slide. We've actually done that in the past. So I think it answers the question much better than that other one is a convoluted adding in. Those numbers don't make sense.
Right.
And so as we discussed the other night, but that's a great question. I don't think that one got asked the other night. So or it was asked and I didn't answer it competently. So it's a good one.
And
So if we could do
I-
that, that's important because it may lead to looking at how we're distributing grade levels across the district, and although that, futuristic kind of things. I mean, really looking at how do you maximize resources. So it's an interesting question.
Brian, haven't we talked about that in the past, though, that we try to keep families together?
Yep. And see that goes and that leads to the next question. And so when you start looking at the numbers like that, you start to think about, well, if kids were more concentrated, so those are all of the things that you could look at and to keep them. But yes, Lynn, the goal is to keep families together. We never want families, if any possible, to be in multiple places. It used to happen. It happens in a lot of districts where there might be one special class, for example, where a child may qualify in a family and it's only in one school. and it may be the school that's on the opposite side of the district, but that's where that specialized program is. And, I think one of the things always important is to try to keep kids together, if at all possible. And that's, obviously it's one of the things we do. It's a great question.
And I had a similar question that I was planning on asking more toward the end of the night, but my question was similar. What metrics will be used to determine if the district should realign the elementary schools, possibly decreasing by 1 and transitioning the junior high to a middle school, either 6 to 8 or 5 through 8?
Becky, you asked the best loaded questions, and it's a great question. It's a great question because and I know that oftentimes what districts would do is they would actually have a study done, and they would really look at a number of different metrics. They often will, work with a consultant. I know a number of years ago, and I think it's pre-Brian, here, there was some studies done around that. I think it was specific around the junior high at the time. And I think, watching our numbers, I think if you go back to that slide where it shows, that we've reduced over 10 years, almost, over 500 students, you start to look at that. And I think that, obviously as our numbers, as we watch those, I think it's a great question, Becky. It may be a very important question that goes into that second question that's at the end of tonight, which is, what is that long-term strategy about, maximizing resources, getting them in the right spots? And it might be more cost effective and educational impactive to look at those types of things. And then you drive your dollars differently than that way. So it's a great question. I think what I would say is that, as far as those metrics, really looking at the question that Jess asked, which is, if you start to see, classrooms across the district that are at different, same grade level, but kind of not equivalent, to not equal, but not equivalent, equitable across, you start to say, wait a second, our distribution doesn't look right. Like if we had 12 kids at a classroom or 14 kids at a classroom and another building's at 24, you're like, something's not right here. And that's when you really have to look at that, because your resources then aren't maximizing for the most number of kids. So those would be the kinds of things that would need to be considered and looked at, to go down the road. It takes about 1.5 to 2 years to go and reconfigure and things like that. I know that question came up last year as well, in that discussion. And it's something that if those trends continue, they slow down a little bit. But as I said, as you see what we've adjusted, it's something that maybe need to be considered down the road in the future. It's a good question. On the staffing, same thing, just shows in English secondary is 712. We added an English position, an RTI or a reading or a ELA position to support ELA, and a math one as well. So what the red, remember, are all on the CRSA, ARP, so the federal funds. So those would be positions as we move forward to look at and really keep an eye on. Is the impact what we're looking at? Have we driven the resources in the right places? These are the human resources that we have. And then on the district staffing, we've added the one counselor that supports the 6th grades. That's actually a state requirement. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Geithner, right? It's something that we need to do.
Yep. All 6th grade students have to have access to a certified school counselor per the changes to the guidance plans.
Okay, thank you. We've added the nurse. The nurse is actually through our CRSA, our ARP. What that is, it's actually also through the Oswego County funding that we're still trying to get aired out there for everybody, but it could go there as well. She's running our lab, and those of you that have had the opportunity to use that, we're getting really positive reviews. I wish we could have done it months ahead, but it made a difference for some families and staff. Our teacher assistants, we had added 4, and for our teachers for students with other than English, students that have English as a second language, we added 1 teacher there. So again, that's something that we need to keep an eye on. So those are the positions there. And then we finally, we've got the district staffing. We had 3 instructional coaches, 2.5. 5 are doing the restorative practice specialists, the district intervention team facilitator, and the SAL coach. So all of the red positions, I believe they add up to 30, are all associated with the federal stimulus funds. And so over time, we need to look at, towards the end of this year, really getting feedback from staff and families about the programs, things like that. We'll have to generate, ways to really get feedback and these, to look at the impacts, to look at, as we build not only next year's budget, but budgets a year and a year after that, that we look at that. Any questions? Oops. And then just recently, we realized when we were looking at our program, you're always looking at where do we have deficits, or where do we say, jeepers, we didn't put enough in, or we didn't put supports. The one area we didn't seem to drive any specific supports to was special education support. So we added support to the special education program with Kathy Adams. We've got just about 600 kids in the program. And so we did add that support, and we're seeing that that's starting to make a difference there. So again, we added it there at the present time. So that's there. And then our retirements this year are also listed in this slide deck. And we've started some postings already. So we're already moving forward with these at this point. And that was that process. The other, to take you into where we're at, I just want to give you an idea of where we're at as far as the budget and the financials. What we're looking at in these slides, is our tax base grew 0.35%. The increase is capped at 2%. Remember, New York State's 2% means 2%. Our pilots, or our payments in lieu of taxes, businesses, things like that have those agreements, they're estimated to be the same. Our allowable tax levy. So in other words, if right now, this year, we just did the calculation, it had to be turned in by today, is 2.43%. So when they did all the formula out, and you have a copy of that in the documents there that you received, that document came out to 2.43% this year. Last year it was 4.08%. So, and I'll show you in a minute kind of what that means. So what if you said we're going to go out and we're going to do 2.43%, we're going to our tax map, it would generate another $524,000 for the district. So that just gives you that idea. So, and this just breaks it down for you just as an estimate if people were asking if we go down this path, and in a moment, I can show you exactly where we're at on a roll forward, on initial. 0.5% is 108,000. If you take half of 216 or double 108, that's 1%, 216. It's very straightforward math. So what do our revenues look like? So our foundation aid right now is $38,869,431. This was a $2 million. We had initially had a $2 million, almost right on the nose, $2,001,000 came in. We talked about that at a previous meeting. At a meeting 2 weeks ago, we were watching the CNY School Boards Association, and Dr. Timms was doing his presentation. And that day, which was February 17th, they had just done a second set of runs, which we had never really, nothing ever changes in the second run. And this year it meant $263,000 more dollars for Fulton. Great news. And so we're running around trying to get that confirmed to make sure. I believe it is true. So this number went up $263,000 from the last time that we all spoke. So that's an important figure. So keep $263,000 in mind. And then your services aid, your building aids, these are really generated on monies receiving back and excess cost aid. So the foundation aid, these are based on actual expenditures, 1 year delayed, and then as come back to the district. Foundation aid is that new monies generated every year. Our other revenues, this is your pilots, Medicaid monies, things like that, approximately $1.5 million. Our tax levy with no increase. So zero tax levy. Right now, our tax levy is $21,613,705. That's what it was in the current school year we're in, and it's what it was actually last year as well, because I believe we did a zero last year. So what that comes out to is, it says we've got $78,724,000 $3,243,000. So that's the total revenues that we're estimating without changing anything. Our proposed budget is a 3.7% roll forward. So in other words, looking at everything in the current budget right now, nothing out, nothing in, little bit of an adjustment in healthcare because we're doing well, so we could adjust that a little bit. But minor adjustments brings you in at 324,457 shortfall. Remember, when we put this together for the board, it was on that Thursday during the day, we finalized it, and that night we got 263 more. So if we hadn't received that 263, you would add that actually to this 324, which pushes us closer to 600,000. So we had actually had a budget that was 600,000 short, but because we got the 263, it brought it down to 324. So what this is if nothing changed right now, the money that we're looking at right now is 78,724, and that's not adding anything new at all. No new revenues, nothing new, no more money's coming in from the state, which for the first time I don't think will increase in April, which it normally has in the past. And our budget at 3.7%, Dom, that's correct, right? 3.7 or 3.9? 3.7? Okay. Is 79 million. So in other words, we're short. Now, if you go to the next slide, if we did a 0.5%, if that was our way to do this, not removing anything out of the budget, not reducing anything out of the budget, we're at 222. At 1%, it would be 114,000. At 1.5, 6,657. And in fact, at 2%, we'd have a surplus. And then if we did go to our 2.43%, you'd actually have a surplus. You don't see districts generally go for a budget with a surplus. So that would give you the idea, because I know people like to know, like, what's the impact? That gives you an idea of how on the local side, because remember from the slide I shared with you previously, about 68.5% of our budget comes from the state of New York, and about 28% comes from our tax levy. So we have an increase of about 5.67% up here in our foundation aid, but we have 0 here. Hence, even though that 3.7 is less than the 5.6, the issue is that tax levy, if you see, if we raise that tax levy, you'll see how we close the gap without making any. So is that confusing as I can be or not? I hope it's not. It's a lot of information and I talk fast. I apologize. But the idea is that the revenues that came in for the first time in many years, it shows that our budgeting is pretty good, and that the increase from the state actually carries us pretty well. So it shows that our budget it's pretty good right now that we're in, and that the roll forward seems to do. Now, what didn't we add to this budget? We haven't added one federal position to this budget. That's something to think about. Are there positions that, is this a year where we should say, all right, if we were going to integrate 3 to 4 positions in this year, should we do that? Is that something we need to do in this budget year? That's a question, for the budget committee, and others could say, all right, we could raise our proposed budget to, 79,000 or 79,600,000. And just to give you an idea, a full-time employee in the teacher, we would use like 190 to 100,000. We generally use $91,000 as a first year salary, benefits, family benefits. 91,000 is the number we use. If it's a teaching assistant, we use approximately 50,000. So it gives you an idea on how to say, okay, if we're going to add 5 teaching positions at 91,000, what is that? 450,000. So that gives you the idea, how we could start to look at that. So you see, when I talk about the number of positions on the federal budget, we have to think about, all right, if we build in some of them into next year's budget, we start to now build them in, they become part of the future. And we do it in an economic way. So right now, that's where we are on March 1st. Does that make sense? Like, do you see how right now we're so close? Do we now start to say, okay, if we were going to build in 4 more positions, how could we do that? Or do we want to say, all right, we want to wait And, but then next year we got to think about, all right, will we get that same gain? We're told from New York State we should get our other 5%. And they did it this year. So hopefully they're true to form and that happens again. So that's good news. But 3 years from now, we'll be at 100% full funding at that time. What will they do? And that's the big question. And one of the things that we don't know is what will happen to us in 3 years. We know this coming year, just over 5%, we were just about 90% of our foundation aid. So the state said, over the next 2 years, we're going to make you whole. So this year, 5% for us, just over $2 million, just a nick over, about 2.2 million. And then next year, we would expect 2.2 million. After that, the question is, what will it be? What they did in New York State this year was they gave 3%. So 6 of the school districts in Oswego County were already at fully funded. Technically, that number could have been 0. And what the state of New York did this year is they gave 3%. So if you're at any of the other 6 of the districts in our county, that they got 3, they only got 3%. Us, Oswego, and I can't remember the third off the top of my head, we were made more whole because we had a wider gap between our 100% funded and where we were. And, for us, as I said, it was a little over 5.5%. Oswego was much higher than that, and that's where they're at. So that's where that is. And is that confusing enough, or is that, am I being clear? Does it make sense? Dom or Jerry or anybody, any questions?
I have a quick question, probably more for Dom, but how conservative is our roll forward at 3.7%?
Good question. It's relatively conservative, but we do have a little bit more work to do.
Okay.
Yeah,
If
we
What
tend to,
is,
If
that's
we're
what
going
we've
to have,
used every year, Jen. We've
Right.
been going about 3.5 to 4.5.
we probably have to look at our healthcare a little bit closer, but we're probably fairly close.
do we do stop loss insurance?
Yes.
We do.
Or Jerry, do you want us to comment? Or Dom, either one.
We do.
Yeah, I was just curious because I know that can make a huge difference with insurance and stuff. Okay, that's all.
Yeah. Right now, knock on wood, we're doing well with our healthcare. We're underspending the anticipated budget, but I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago from memory, we were riding at this point, over by about 18%, so we've done very well with it. Since I've been here, I can't speak to it before, but when you look at over time, we do better than some of the consortiums that are out there, but we're self-insured and we have to continue to watch that. So on a monthly basis, there's a budget committee that actually looks at those numbers that Ms. Geithner and a number of bargaining unit representatives are a part of those teams.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, doctors' offices aren't seeing a lot of people. People aren't going places or going to the doctor as much this year either. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, what happens over the next couple of months. I mean, I think doctors are starting to open up again and get more elective surgeries, knees, hips, all that good stuff. They're getting cranked up. They're getting ORs reopened and things like that. So we may see some of the impacts over that with some of the work that could not be done perhaps over the last couple of years.
Brian, are you talking about, you were hinting at adding positions? Would they be the positions that we have right now paying for out of our federal stimulus money?
Yeah, I mean, my point of view, and one of the questions that the board and this budget committee has consistently asked is how do you sustain and have the capacity, and then over time, how do you sustain this work that you're doing, and how do you make sure you have the capacity to sustain that work? And that's exactly what this is that discussion around. So for example, we've bought desks. Well, those are one-time purchases. Those are good things to buy with one-time monies because they're going to last a while and they're one-time expenditures. So all of the new desks and chairs at the high school and the junior high, great example of that. Work that we're doing around, other one-time costs that are built in, a purchase of technology, so on and so forth, all of those types of things. The FTEs, the full-time employee equivalents, the 30 that I referenced, are really key that we think about, because those are the costs that aren't one-year costs. Those are costs that we say, okay, we needed these positions immediately to get everything jump-started and supported, and resources to support teaching and learning and all of those. And so that's what that is. I apologize. And so that's what that is. So that is the question, Lynn, is that we need to start thinking about prior to, and it's so early in the process. We're only about 5-6 months into school. I think we passed the 100th day the other day. And so we're just getting through kind of past that midpoint, just past the midpoint in the year. So that, yes, the answer is, I would say we would be prioritizing looking at those positions first, because obviously we made those priorities at this point in time to make sure, said these are really important.
Mr. Polvino, how many contracts expire in June?
Jerry, can you comment, please?
3.
And they are?
Teachers, aides, and food service.
And
What
only-
we did do is we always think about in our roll forward, those contracts, we always take any anticipated changes into consideration. And we try to at least get a number in the numbers in there, because you got to have monies built in, which always makes it hard, so hard to anticipate, Great questions. And then finally, this is, I think everybody knows that have been through this before. It's one of my favorite slides. It just shows, it's a great way to show and demonstrate to our taxpayers and our stakeholders that this slide really goes back to 12-13. And this slide is the actual budget that year. It's the enacted tax levy, the increase over the tax levy. So that year they had a 1.9% increase that resulted in $368,000 and a result in a tax levy of 19.7. And what they could have done, the permissible was 19.9. They could have done 3.1 and 592. So in other words, the board at that time made the decision based on the needs of the district, based on the economics of the time, based on all of the parameters that they were looking at the time. They made a decision to do a 1.9% and generated $368,000 new tax dollars on the local side. And then on the next year, they did a 0.99. It could have been a 2.1, and so generated 196,000. At the bottom of this process, and the red means we actually had a negative tax cap. Formula was it was my second year. We actually had a negative tax cap. So our tax actually went down. Our tax base went down $357,000. And then what we've done since is to recover and kind of go back. We did a 2.02 and a 2.69 and a 2, which put us back in more of a consistent 1% a year over time. And then last year we did a 0. In the current budget that we have right now, we did a 0. And then currently at the present time for next year, this is the maximum possible, as I shared with you a few minutes ago. What it shows is we could have over time generated $4.9 million if all of the boards over time had recommended and voters had approved. We could have generated $4.9 million, and over that same time, that includes the 22-23 if we were doing that, and we've actually grown at 2.7, so about $2 million less than what could be generated. So I think that shows that being fiscally responsible, and over time, I think boards have done a good job. When you average that over time, it comes out, somewhere 1.5% to 2%. And I don't have time to do all the math there quick, but it's just a great slide that shows that we're pretty fiscally responsible, and that we have taken opportunities to slowly grow our tax levy, with the understanding that Fulton tends to be one of the higher tax rate districts in the entire state. And those of you that live in the city of Fulton know that that's $57, $58 per thousand. And some counties, so somebody asked me one day, I asked somebody, what's higher, Skinny Atlas's or Fulton's tax levy or tax rate? Down there, it's in the 20s, and here it's in the 50s. And so it's an interesting, because you wouldn't anticipate that, but the homes are worth more And so it generates, it's how it works. So it's just a good slide. And finally, I just want to go back to where we're, so that's the last slide of those presentations. And I really wanted to get us where I wanted to go. I apologize, it took about 45 minutes to get here. But really wanting to have that discussion, you know, as we've talked about things, and you can see where I talked about, you know, there's always those questions about federal funds and what can we sustain and what do we have capacity for? That's an important question that I think is out there. What do we need to think about that question around, you know, long term, and thinking about maximizing resources that Becky asked. So those are the kinds of things. So I don't know, Dom and Jerry, I don't know if we're going to try to, do we want to do it as a whole group? Do we want to do it as a whole group conversation? Do you want us to try to get into small groups? What's everybody's pleasure this evening? Last time everybody wanted to stay together.
Well, we don't have consensus. We can try as a group and see how that goes for us. How's that sound, folks? We have a relatively small folk group.
So this is the time for Brian to actually be quiet and practice active listening. I just wanted to make sure you had all of that information. So what are the top 3 questions? What do you think that, what are things that as you're sitting here, what do you want to know more about, or what do you think your constituents are going to want to know more about?
Do you want us just to chime in, or do you want
to have an open
go
dialogue? Sounds like we're going to give it a run maybe for 20 minutes or so, and then we can call it an evening, 23 minutes.
Okay. I have people that have asked me, I know, and maybe I don't quite understand this either, but our UPK transportation, how do we, I don't know if that has affected our enrollment numbers. I would imagine that we probably have a little bit greater enrollment if we are able to provide transportation, but I don't truly know what those numbers are. But I kind of was under the impression that it was like a specific time period of a grant. But again, I don't really know that much about it, but I have had people, you know, inquire about that.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah, and just in a very global, general way, when we added transportation, we added numbers. When we weren't providing transportation, the numbers slid back. So it shows that our parents did take advantage, and it did provide opportunities for kids. So yeah.
And it's good to get the kids in there, I think. You know, the earlier the better, and get them, you know, some kind of structure and
in the runs from the state and the foundation, there's a flat fund there. It's $657,000. There's been a press in New York State to say you really need to change that number. That 657 has been 657 since I've been here in Fulton. That's a number that has not changed. Small cities have, they're encouraging, as well as our current president, to increase early childhood funding as well. So the answer to that is, right now, our board always, since I've been here, and I believe previous, because is that it's always been anything we do with pre-K, we need to be able to make sure it's funded through those monies, not any from the general fund. And the leaders of our UPK, our directors, and who they're working with, and the different agencies have been able to keep us, and including costs us around $75,000, give or take, for the UPK transportation. So we've been able to do that. Great question. And I think it's something, you're right, a lot of people would be asking about.
Brian, how much longer do we have on our grant money for our breakfast and lunch?
It's
5 years.
It's 3 to 5 year, or it's 5-year windows, and I believe it's re-up. So right now, my understanding, when I last talked to Terry, but I need to get confirmation, I believe we still have at least 3 years to go. And it's not a grant, it's a program. Yeah, it's a program. And right now, the push at the federal level is actually to grow the CEP programs across the state, or across the country, because it's a federal, but it's something we're keeping an eye on very closely.
And question number 2, as far as picking and choosing what we should do as far as hiring on those 30 positions, how are we going to work that?
Well, I think, you know, we really got to start wrapping, you know, until I saw that number, because I haven't seen a number to start with that low since I've got here. I mean, one year it's generally been almost $1 million gap. Our first runs normally have 650,000, 800,000. This year it's 2.2 million and well 2.2 now with the 256. So, I mean, look at the difference. And so if we didn't have that the way we've normally been funded, we would be showing that same kind of gap. So, yeah. Sorry, Chiefs are blowing up the text here tonight. Sorry about that. And so what I would say is we need to look at the priorities and start getting feedback. One of the things that we need to start exploring is impacts of some of these positions, looking at, what we're doing. Are there any that we should move over? Or, Peaceful Schools has shown to be a extremely positive type of thing, which isn't an FTE. That's an example of something that's not an FTE, but it's in a grant right now, Jerry, right? How are we? It's in the what is it?
It's in the ARP.
ARP.
funding.
Yeah, I was trying to grab my letters here. ARP. So it's one of those things. That's an example of a program that provides small group work. I mean, Jerry could talk about, but that's one we've heard a lot of positive things about since we started. So that may be something. Do you look at that? But as far as prioritizing, I think what we have to look at is and get feedback on it, and we need to start to find ways to collect feedback on just how are these positions going and how are these additional resources
Would
working.
you want to put those into this year's budget?
Well, I think one of the things we need to take a look at is we really have through the fall of, we got to have it locked in by the fall of 24-25. So that budget year. So we're doing 23, 22. We're doing right now. What are we doing? 22, 23, 23, 24 is next year. 24, 25 may not have any increases. So for us, I think we need to start looking at, are there things right now that we're like, wow, this is something we really should consider moving over now? And then using some of the ARPs, is there any one-time things that we need to purchase? Make an adjustment for that.
Okay.
That goes to capacity and sustainability. Yep.
I'd like to just kind of piggyback off something that Jess had mentioned earlier about class sizes.
Yep.
And, just the whole, looking at the whole strategic coherence plan. If we want students reading on grade level by third grade, I think that we need to seriously take a look at our class sizes at K2. We have multiple classrooms in the district at the kindergarten level with 24, 25 kids in them. And I think that is definitely something that we should be considering if we are looking at an overall goal of having 95% of our students reading on grade level for third grade.
Got it down. Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, again, we're looking at, and you heard me earlier, we had, did I say it or not? When we did Peaceful Schools, we got so much positive feedback that we actually grew the program a little bit. So more schools were impacted. So I think that was something we learned. And I think that's what's important. If we had the perfect plan in year one and we say, wow, we got this right. I mentioned we added the special ed support because we realized we're like, wait a second. We didn't hit that group. We didn't say, well, we'll do that next year. We said, we got to build that in now. So the same thing, I think we've got to look at things and that's a great example of just looking at things to say, are we driving the resources the right way to make the impact? So that's something that, obviously is on the list now, to take a peek at.
I'm going to ask a question and it might sound really stupid, but I just, thinking about things. We have a lot of instructional coaches this year. Carrie, I feel like, are you the only teacher on this?
Penny Downing from the high school is on with us.
Okay. All right. Would it ever be something that we could implement where we have teachers kind of floating, like not necessarily you're a second grade teacher and you're always going to be a second grade teacher, but so we have 2 kindergarten classes that are 24 kids. What if we have a floating teacher instead of doing like an instructional coach that could go to the grade level that's needed at that time. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And is it something that teachers would be like open to doing? Is it something we could do? Is it crazy? Or, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of possible solutions.
I think that anytime we can keep class sizes down, especially at the kindergarten, first grade level, is going
Yep.
to be a good positive move. How that happens, I don't necessarily know how that would happen. That's up to the district to decide if they choose to make that decision.
But is that something that you think is that an okay idea, or is that a crazy idea?
So I'll give you a great example from in my previous district when I was a principal. I was gifted with a small grant and an amazing staff and amazing kids. But 1% of the kids were actually reading proficiently, and so it was a great combination. And what we did was, if you walked through that building, you'd see an hour and a half reading block, but you'd see multiple adults in the classroom. So we would slide, for example, my speech pathologist might be in a room running groups, and specifically around phonics and phonemic awareness, aligning with the IEPs, but also other kids. We had teachers pushing in, like what you're describing. I called them TA subs, is what we called them. I was able to figure out a way to get those. And so they were a certified teacher on staff, and we were able. So there's a lot of different ways, but what it did was it created different types of opportunities for small bursts of time, for that hour and a half of reading time. So you can get very creative. I guess the answer to your question, Jess, is a lot of different ways. And we constantly should always be looking at how are we best supporting the classrooms and the needs at that time. So, and I think you all know that I would have loved to seen where we're at if COVID never happened. I think we'd be in a very interesting place right now, a special place, because we were on the cusp of some things. Our teachers are just so poised and supported. Things were going well. And then, of course, COVID came and really changed some things and impacted kids in so many different ways, and staff. So, great question, Jim.
And some of the biggest issues this year specifically is we have a lot of kids that didn't participate in UPK last year because of COVID. So now we've got kind of that whole other population of kids that didn't get UPK. So again, that creates a higher need. And anytime you have higher numbers with more need, it really is very difficult and very challenging.
So I want to follow up on that at the high school level. Unless Mr. Polvino knows something that we don't, I don't think the state has decided yet what they're doing with Regents exams in June. So my concern is, do the high school teachers feel that students are ready to be successful if the state implements Regents exams for June, or do we still have students who are behind from the last 2 years? And is there money in the current budget if we need to do any type of academic intervention to get these kids ready to take the Regents exams in June?
So on the Jerry or Donna, the Regents, I guess it's been a long week for me, so I'm not as sharp tonight as I normally am. Are they on right now? They're on right now, correct?
They are in June. Yeah, they were canceled for January.
In January, they were canceled, right? Okay.
Understandable. Becky, I don't think anybody will disagree that we're not feeling prepared, that our students are not feeling prepared for exams. Attendance has really been a barrier for many these past 2 years. It really has. I do think that's a good idea to try to come up with, I hate to think of kill and drill, but we should come up with ways to help our students feel better prepared.
Yeah, because Mrs. Parkhurst, if we go back to, pre-COVID, these kids are going to have to pass these Regents exams to graduate.
Yeah, our juniors haven't taken exams at all. They've not, unless you're an advanced student and as a junior, they have not taken a Regents exam.
But did they get the, some of our students have gotten
they have gotten exemptions.
Right, they got exemptions. So they would have gotten their, any Regents courses they took their 9th or 10th grade years?
If they received credit, then they
Right.
did get an exemption.
So they got the exemption. So
Yep.
that's a good news for kids. What I would say to Don and I think that in front of everybody is that, you know, if the high school are indicating, and I've seen there's been a lot more articles on what they call tutorials. Ed Week, you know, you'll see it, research-based types of things, a lot more work around intensive work around tutorial is what they call it. You know, and I don't know, and I haven't dug into it and read a lot of that. But what it's talking about is providing extra supports to try to better prepare kids. So if that was something that Donna was, we would go in and we could take a look at our federal funds and say, all right, is there something that we could do if kids would attend or support? Same thing would go for, you know, other kinds of things. But obviously regents are high stakes, you know, assessments that can mean walking the stage and graduating or not. And that's about as high stakes as we get, because that's why we're here.
Yeah, we would definitely need to think outside the box.
Yep.
Just based on, I mean, we're having a tough time engaging our students with tutoring, you know, let alone in their classrooms. It's, you know, it's a nationwide problem, but I agree, Becky. We need to think about it.
Yeah. And you're right. There's many, it is a national and a regional, everybody's having this issue with is what we're hearing. So I agree with you. But I guess the answer would be, we would always do whatever's not, you know, whatever we can. And that would really be driven by our schools, because they're on the front lines with our kids, they would say, and we have very good leaders in there that let us know when they need something. So these are good questions. And you slide into the next one too. I mean, we really can be fluid. I'm keeping, you know me, with my book here. So I'm writing down all your comments and the discussion. What questions do we need to explore for strategic long-term? And kind of, Lynn already hit on the federal one. Really need to start wrapping our head around, are there things, you know, that we need to think about sliding over or not this year, things like that. So, because that makes a difference, you know, where we might think about the tax levy. The other thing that we didn't talk about was obviously our fund balance and reserves also are a way. And right now we're over our 4%. We're a little bit closer to 5%. You know, and I don't see a problem in that, but you're supposed to be at 4. The legislature is pushing for 8. They'd like to see that go to 8. And if you are familiar with Governor Hochul's presentation, she wants New York State at 15% in their savings accounts. And that's really what those are, is your savings accounts. So we're like, okay, the state gets to take 15 and school districts are at 4, you know, kind of an interesting piece there. So we're strong in our fund balance and our reserves, but remember, if you take them out of your fund balance and reserves, those are one-time monies, just like it's like giving yourself your own grant. It's like going to your savings account. So so I think the big one on that one is the federal. Are there other questions or thoughts or things that we should be thinking out of the box? And obviously, if you think about things after tonight's meeting, pop them right over to us and we'll add them right in there.
Mr. Polvino, I think one thing that's on the minds of a lot of people that live in the city of Fulton is the citywide tax reassessment. There is a town hall meeting tomorrow night at the War Memorial, where the company that the city is contracted out with will be talking about the citywide reassessment. So I think there's a lot of concern that you know, houses are going to be assessed higher, because right now it has been a seller's market. And what does that mean for people's taxes?
Yep. Yeah, I know we were starting to look into things. We really aren't a part of that process, you know, but you're right. I think that is one of the things. We were actually, I was talking with a constituent the other day, and the person was talking about that the house across the street was sold for, I think it was $45,000 or $50,000 about 7 or 8 years ago. $145,000 this fall. I mean, same street, same house. They made a few adjustments and things like that. But 100,000, I mean, that's almost triple the value, or is triple the value of the home. So you're right. And I think homes sold here in Fulton in days, hours in some cases. They'd go on in the morning, and in the afternoon that would say pending. You know, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So you're right. And I think there was and people got the prices that they were looking for as well. So you're right. How will that impact? I mean, you know, if it's sold for $150,000, you thought it was worth $150,000. So you know, how are you going to come and argue the new assessment? So it's going to be an interesting time here in Fulton.
Is that something that you actually communicate with the mayor at all?
We have not had a discussion about this. We were really, one of the things that people really get to vote on is their school taxes, you know, and be a part of that. And I felt like we shouldn't be a part of anywhere near people's assessments, because to me that's, you know, it's hard enough when we go out and we ask, you know, and our community has been absolutely wonderful. So we have not been there. I didn't, you know, I think we're monitoring it closely, because obviously property tax comes from the county. They don't get to vote. You don't vote on that part. You vote on the school tax. So obviously it's our part where the community can have the greatest voice. And, you know, there's the impact, you know, as well as 50, I think it was 57, I think said earlier, 57, 58 and change per thousand. So it is extensive. I actually looked at a house in the city at one point here recently. I just took a look, and what's interesting is that the taxes were the same as on my house that I live in currently, which I don't need to be in such a big place. And so, but was interesting, I'm like half the size, but the same amount of taxes. I was like, wow, that was it quantified it for me. So it was an interesting look. So. Other questions? These are really great. All right. All right. So our next budget committee, of course, I don't have my calendar up right here in front of me. The first will be, sorry, 22nd, 29th. What does that say? I will have to get, I don't have a calendar. I know that April calendar gets a little bit strange because of, we had to adjust for April break. So our first board meeting is on the 5th. So I'll have to look to see on the calendar when we can get that out, and just a reminder when the next budget committee is. What I would say is, if you have any questions, please let us know. I know that we're trying to get the FAQ up. I'm not sure if that's up yet, Dom, on the website, if people have questions on the budget. We're also in the process, I'm not sure where we're at with the Let's Talk, which is another vehicle where you press the button and you can actually write questions, and they would be generated right to me or Dom. And to generate questions around the budget, it would be budget specific. Thought that might be the area where we could start using that product that might help us generate more discussion.
That's being launched later this week.
Okay. And then we're working, as I said before, on the videos and things like that. Great ideas, when we just haven't been able to finish them up. We got the scripts, but we don't have, we haven't had the time to film. So, because we got some great stuff we want to share. Tell our story. If there are no other questions this evening, thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I look forward. And as you think about I'm sure you'll think of things in the evening or down the road. And because I think we can get creative. Creativity actually, I think, makes budgeting even more fun. How can we extend those resources and get even a better impact for our dollars for our kids? So. All righty. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.